You may be aware that there were two Ghostbusters shows in the 80s, the Filmation one and the one based on the movie. It goes back farther than the cartoons or the first movie. The original Ghostbusters was The Ghostbusters, a live-action kids show from the 70s. The Dan Aykroyd film had nothing to do with the show, but it gave Filmation first dibs on the title, so Columbia Pictures had to pay them $500,000 for the license. Filmation president Lou Scheimer reached out to Columbia after the film's release to discuss a potential partnership in developing an animated series, but Columbia weren't interested, so you wound up with two unrelated Ghostbusters shows. Columbia called theirs The Real Ghostbusters to differentiate it from the Filmation series simply called Ghostbusters. And the title is explained in an episode where the characters visit the set of the Dan Aykroyd film, explaining that the movie is based on the real-life exploits of these guys.
Murray, Aykroyd, and Ramis? What's that, a law firm?
Anyway, all three of these shows did a Dracula episode, so let's start from the beginning. The Ghostbusters, The Vampire's Apprentice. Filmation gets a lot of flack for basically ripping Scooby-Doo off over and over again, because that's what they did. A typical episode of The Ghostbusters sees the guys getting a call, heading to a haunted house type location, and getting involved in madcap chase sequences. The Vampire's Apprentice sees the Ghostbusters facing off with Count Dracula and his wife, and there are some cute touches to the character here, like Dracula wearing chattering wind-up dentures, and when he goes to the dentist to have his fangs elongated. This show is mostly an excuse to string together a bunch of corny vaudeville jokes. Some of them aren't bad. I like when one of the Ghostbusters is turned into a vampire, and the gorilla holds up a picture next to him to double check that he didn't have the fangs before. I like the Halloween special vibe with the cheap sets and everyone treating this like an extended comedy sketch, but mostly I like that that's over with and I don't have to watch any more episodes of the original Ghostbusters.
Now what's with them? I just wanted to show them the neat teeth I'd found in a box of popcorn.
Ghostbusters, Shades of Dracula.
Nice of you to drop in, Ghostbusters!
Filmation gets a lot of flack for basically ripping Scooby-Doo off over and over again because that's what they did. A typical episode of Ghostbusters sees the guys getting a call, heading to a haunted house type location, and getting involved in madcap chase sequences. By the mid-1980s, the Filmation formula felt kinda dusty, unsophisticated. The animation, writing, voice acting, it all felt about a decade out of date. The Saturday morning cartoons of the 1980s are maybe a little too revered. Gen X nostalgia has become suffocating in its dominance over modern pop culture, but shows like Transformers, G.I. Joe, Garfield and Friends, and even Filmation's own Masters of the Universe really did raise the bar, introducing more complex plotting and sophisticated animation over the looping background chases and sight gag script writing of the Hanna-Barbera era.
These guys are telling jokes. They're not supposed to do that. Yeah, next thing you know, people will start laughing at them.
Shades of Dracula feels interchangeable with The Vampire's Apprentice. They get called to Dracula's castle, they run around the place for a bit, they make a lot of dumb jokes, and then they vanquish the monster in the end. To the show's credit, the Dracula design looks pretty neat, and the finish is a little more clever than in the live-action episode. The original Ghostbusters just used their ghost zapper on Dracula, who is not a ghost, while the cartoon acknowledges that it won't work on vampires, so they trick him into going into bat mode, trap him in the gorilla's cum jar, and ultimately send him into the sunlight on a balloon. It's nonsense, but there's at least a couple extra steps to it. It was always a disappointment when you tuned into Ghostbusters as a kid, and it was this one. The Real Ghostbusters, Transylvanian Homesick Blues.
Hey, speak of the devil! Just forget I said that.
The basic structure that they followed in The Real Ghostbusters was not that much different from what they followed on any other cartoon ghost show. They get a call, they go to a haunted house, and they capture the bad guy. But what The Real Ghostbusters did with that structure was generally a lot more interesting. Transylvanian Homesick Blues sees the guys being called to Moldavia, a fictional nation comprising territory once known as Transylvania. as the townfolk are being terrorized by ghostly bat apparitions. They're met by their host, Count Vostok, who displays a handful of vampiric qualities before transforming into a bat before their eyes and zapping the apparitions out of the sky. Soon, it's revealed that Count Vostok was the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, with Stoker having written the novel as a fictionalization of an ongoing family feud between the Vostoks and the Van Heldings. The grandson of the original Abraham Van Helding has been waging a war of terror on the people of Moldavia in order to vilify the Count, using holographic bats in a series of false flag attacks. Way back when Vlad the Impaler was going around impaling people, pamphlets were distributed reporting that Vlad dipped his bread in the blood of his victims, and this propaganda served as partial inspiration for Stoker's Dracula. Vlad the Impaler earned his nickname the hard way, but a lot of what we believe about the historical figure to this day originates from this myth-making. Dracula as a product of propaganda is a fascinating idea for a vampire story, and one that I haven't seen explored in a movie as well as it's explored by the Real Ghostbusters. I don't think they ever made a Count Vostok action figure, but there was a toy named the Dracula monster that Kenner released as part of their Movie Monsters line. You squeeze his legs together and he goes like this. I didn't hate either of the Filmation Dracula stories, but the Real Ghostbuster take on the character is an actual take on the character. There's nothing about Filmation's Draculas that you couldn't apply to any ancient vampire. The Real Ghostbusters episode is uniquely interested in exploring the nature of myth-making as it pertains to pseudo-historical monsters like Count Dracula. Whenever you hear a horror story, you need to ask yourself, who wants me to be scared of that and why? Anyway, I like this bit here where a feast prepared by Count Vostok is devoured by Slimer, leaving a banana peel on the table. On the one hand, discarded banana peels are just something you throw out there with bones and stuff when drawing random table scraps, but bananas were a rare treasure in 80s communist Romania, so this was a culturally accurate-ish depiction of this time and place.